operating model, of which he is one of the key designers. Anna Thomas from HMRC leads on policy and strategy for the single trader window, so is going to dive into what is a single trader window, what does it mean for you as businesses, and also what can you expect to see coming at the border, changes coming at the border in the year and perhaps even years ahead. And then we have William Bain, my colleague, who is Head of Trade Policy at the British Chambers of Commerce, who will give some reflections on what Tom and Anna have said, but also focus in on what our members are saying to us and talk a bit about how we engage with government on your behalf to try and make policy better and to be one of those key stakeholders for government that tries to improve at the consultation stage. So if I could turn to you, Tom, first of all, just for the benefit of everyone, we're going to have our speakers, then we'll have an opportunity for Q&A. And if I can ask that you use the Q&A function at the top of your screen, not the chat, the Q&A, that means that we can make sure we capture all your questions and reflect them back to you after this session as part of our feedback, and also give responses. Some we'll do today where we can, others we may have to come back to you retrospectively. So thank you for your attention, thank you for attending, and over to you, Tom.
Liam, thank you very much. Just to introduce myself for those who haven't come across my team and me before, we are based in the Cabinet Office, the central department of the UK government. We are a team that was set up after the Brexit referendum to reflect the magnitude of the task of creating an international trade border in goods with the EU. I report to a minister called Baroness Lucy Neville-Rolfe, who's a former civil servant, a former businesswoman from Tesco, and through her to the Deputy Prime Minister, Oliver Dowden. So we are not HMRC, we are not DEFRA, we are not Border Force. We are not actually the deep technical experts in any of these things. So as always, my apologies in advance. If you have deep technical questions about HMRC or DEFRA processes, I may have to just promise to take those away and come back to you. We have been working since we were set up on the creation of a new regime for trade with the EU, which culminated in the publication of the Border Target Operating Model in August last year. The story so far, we left the single market and the customs union in January 2021. And at that point, the EU introduced their controls and we started bringing in ours. This then took place in stages for a variety of reasons, of which the principal one was that my ministers wanted to stage it and go a bit slowly during the COVID pandemic because of challenges for business readiness. But these sort of 3 years on, we now have a full customs border with the EU, and we are now starting to complete the remaining bits of it, and in particular focusing on the sanitary and phytosanitary controls regime for animal and plant products. The latest step on the way took place on the 31st of January. Starting on the west coast, so the border with Ireland, we completed the customs regime there with full customs controls, and we also brought in pre-notification of the medium risk plant and animal goods and export health certificates and phytosanitary certificates. And we, in fact, for the whole of trade with the EU, this was when we brought in export health certificates and phyto certificates requirement. The remaining milestones, so 31st of October, we will be introducing the safety and security declarations control regime with a slimline data set and delivered through the single trade window, and Anna will be saying more about that a bit later. For completeness, we have announced that we are aiming to bring in physical checks on live animals in October, and we are working towards that. We do not yet have a timetable announced for physical checks on goods from Ireland. We're still exploring how we do a viable SPS solution which respects the safeguarding the union commitments on trade within the UK. So not subjecting qualifying Northern Ireland goods to any international trade bureaucracy. But above all, of course, we've got the milestone coming up on the 30th of April, which is about documentary and physical checks on plant and animal goods at SPS control posts on everything other than the West Coast. Let me just say a bit about our experience of the 31st of January, which, spoiler alert, we think was quite positive, but looking to have a conversation about this today. The first thing to say, this is hugely significant in terms of the added value to the UK of biosecurity. We know that it's an extra burden. We do get that. We've been trying to make the burden as minimal as possible, but we are doing it for this incredibly important reason, given the variety of animal and plant diseases that are endemic in various bits of the EU. In the run-up to the 31st of January, there was some commentary to the effect that people were worried about the possibility of actual disruption at the border. This was never actually my worry. We were just not doing anything that was going to cause disruption at the border. The risk that we were very focused on was that people might find it too difficult to move goods immediately after the 31st of January because they were struggling to get a certificate. We tried to tackle this in various ways, of which probably the largest single thing, and this gets back to the content of the BTOM, was risk categorization. So we created, and I think this is a first among SPS regimes worldwide, this quite large categorization of goods which are low risk and therefore have a very light touch regime. We did a lot, and shout out to my DEFRA colleagues here, a lot of engagement with all the EU authorities to make sure that the certificates were in place. A lot of this was vet to vet conversations. We also planned a pragmatic enforcement approach aimed at helping businesses to get it right, as opposed to stopping them when they get it wrong. So we set up the AFA helpline that people could call if they were struggling for whatever reason to get a certificate. The idea being that they could then explore whether there was some kind of solution just to keep the goods flowing. Incidentally, do please use that helpline and publicize it, because it hasn't had many calls, but where it has had calls, it has always been able to resolve them. All this, from our perspective, looks like it worked reasonably well. So far as our data is telling us, the trade has continued to flow. And as I said, our helpline has only taken a small number of calls, and calls that they were able to deal with. But please do take this opportunity to tell us what you think is going on and whether there are issues that we need to tackle. There's a couple of things that we're aware of. There's a certain amount of confusion about the issue of pre-certification. So in other words, if you're bringing goods if goods originate in member state A and then they're dispatched to the UK from member state B, exactly how does the certification work in both member states? And DEFRA are in conversation with their counterparts across the EU to try to make sure that everybody is clear on that. Secondly, just as a confession, we have heard that our guidance on fruit and veg was quite confusing. DEFRA were working on actually a really good and ambitious program that has a very strong deregulatory element to it. We put some guidance out, and we have been told that we inadvertently gave people the wrong end of the stick in doing so. So sorry about that. We will try to do better in future. To end talking about January on a positive note, I'm really delighted that we have in place now what we think is the first ever SPS trusted trader scheme up and running in the form of the certification logistics pilot. I was with Baroness Neville-Rolfe at the ECS factory near Zeebrugge a couple of weeks ago to see it in action. Obviously, it is a pilot and it will need to be evaluated, but so far so good. It's already making a big difference in terms of streamlining the certification process. And we are now working on the next 2 modules of SPS Trusted Trader. So the facility to allow traders to do checks away from the border, and the facility to allow reduced levels of checks for those of you who use journey assurance technology. I should stress that not everybody who applies to take part in these will be accepted. That's inherent. We're not going to trust just everyone. It's earned trust, not blind trust. And it will be a technical decision-making process, bringing in everyone up to and including the FSA Food Crime Unit. So we really want to make a success of the Trusted Trader, and that means making it extremely robust. April the 30th, this is coming up. So how are we doing? We're confident that the border control posts will be ready to play the role of border control posts and are scaling up their capacity as we speak. And we will take care to match demand to capacity, especially in the short term, by taking a pragmatic approach and flexing and focusing the number of checks that we do. We'll have close ongoing communication to be sure that we're identifying any issues in particular locations. We have not yet announced, I know this is something that is of great concern to some people, the level of the common user charge for the Ashford-Sevington inland border facility, which we are planning should be the facility for the short straits. We're trying to get this out absolutely as soon as possible, but long-standing followers of this agenda will know that there are complicated issues here and can take time to fix. And separately, we're talking to Border Force and others about our plans for catching those people who react to the introduction of controls just by ignoring them and smuggling things in. So we're making very clear in our messaging that we want to provide an SPS regime which is for the compliant, and have a separate approach to catching the smugglers. I won't say much more about the October implementation at this stage, except that it's fully on track. Just a bit about the longer term. We still have big ambitions in terms of using technology and data to drive seamless trade. Some of you will know about our ecosystem of trust pilot projects, which showed that this was very feasible. And now we're testing all this further in terms of the scope for bringing the data from electronic commercial documentation into government systems, exploiting the new Electronic Trade Documents Act. And if this works, then in due course we will be feeding into our business as usual. And in fact, the journey assurance module for SPS is already built on the lessons that we've learned from ecosystem of trust. So really happy to take questions about any of this later, but just to say above all, to lay the foundations for the future of a digitally enabled and slick border, we need to build the single trade window. So Anna, that
very nice segue, Tom. Thank you so much for that. And just reflecting a little bit on what you said at the end there about the Electronic Trade Documents Act, something that some of people attending may not be aware of. I think we found in our own survey, William, that awareness of this bill going through Parliament was fairly low. But what that does is it does pave the way for the use of electronic data, electronic documents to be used for the transfer of title, amongst other things, and the transmission of data through our borders. So nice segue for that into Anna Thomas from HMRC, who's going to explain what the single trader window is and how it might benefit you as businesses. And just to remind you, the Q&A function, thank you, Marie Farrell, for the first question in there. And I encourage you, if you have a question, to post it there during the next session. Thank you. Anna.
Thank you very much, Liam. And as Liam said, I'm Anna Thomas. So HMRC has been asked to deliver something called the single trade window on behalf of the whole of government. So although the programme in project management terms sits in HMRC, it's not just an HMRC and customs thing, it's looking at the whole border. So essentially, single trade window is about enabling traders and all the intermediaries and hauliers and agents, everyone else who support them, to meet border obligations in one place. So you'll be very familiar at the moment with having to deal with HMRC for some things and DEFRA for some things and various parts of government for different things. The idea of single trade window is that we are building a sort of user interface and a front and somewhere for software to plug into via application programming interfaces, that means it all comes, border information all comes into the UK government and can be shared with the devolved governments in one place. And the primary reason for doing this is to improve the journey and the experience for you as people who move goods across the border and users of these services. So the benefits are around ease of administration and time savings, and part of that comes from the ability to reuse data that you enter. So not only is it about giving your data in one place, it's then not asking you to provide the same information multiple times for each declaration or bit of the process you need to do, but if you've told us who you are and what you're moving, and that information is then relevant to different declarations, we can move that data around and allow you to confirm that yes, this applies across the piece and should make the journey easier. And ultimately, if we can make all the information and sort of IT side of the journey easier, that should also then have benefits in not seeing as many goods held up for as long on as many occasions, if all the information is there and correct, and easier for the government at the sort of back end, different departments and agencies to access the right things and have a better picture of what is happening with your consignments. So that's why we're doing it. This allows traders to start thinking about self-serving if they want to. So we think this will still be a minority sport, but whereas at the moment we understand that a lot of businesses, some businesses are put off importing and exporting altogether by the complexity of the systems. Many others, including today's audience, will be importing and exporting, but relying on a whole industry around them and a lot of agents to help complete all of that. And most of you, I expect, will absolutely continue with that model. You will continue to want to use intermediaries. But what you see in the bottom half of this is that one of the ambitions of the single trade window is that if some traders wanted to get into international trade and wanted to be able to do more of their declarations themselves, single trade window should make that more possible. So there may be some traders who want to take that sort of version of the journey. On the next slide, I think the key point that I want to draw out. So the government is not actually doing all the IT development and coding itself. We have contracted with Deloitte, supported by IBM as a consortium, to deliver software as a service for us, and this will be done iteratively. So I'll tell you in a moment sort of where we've got to so far, but we are just beginning the actual delivery of functionality in IT terms, and we will build that over time. So we will see certain functionality being rolled out through just before the end of this financial year, and then through 24-25, and then the estimated lifetime of the programme at the moment runs through to 27-28. So we've probably got the next few years of functionality being incrementally added to what at the moment is the start of a very small skeleton service. And we expect traders and agents and everybody else to start migrating to this over time. So to be absolutely honest with you, at the moment, when we start testing and opening up this service over the next few weeks, I do not expect that most of you will be leaping to join in straight away, because it won't do everything yet that you need it to do. So we expect it'll be in people's interests to start using single trade window at the point it makes sense for them. Ultimately, in the long term, we see it becoming the route in. So we would expect the software packages, for example, the application programming interfaces that they use to send stuff into the current government systems, to be repointed to single trade window, but we haven't set a sort of timescale yet for everybody to migrate. So don't panic yet about having to make changes very quickly. That will come over the coming years when everything is well tested and it becomes easier to switch in. So the next slide, I think the key point here, what have we done so far? So we have just built the first bit of functionality, which is the ability to submit a customs import declaration through the single trade window. So in December and then again in January, we had a real live trader connect into the service in that environment and successfully submit their customs import declaration. That was our initial test, as it were, to test that all the data is going through into CDS and back-end systems in the right way. It isn't yet, that is built at the moment for non-temporary storage locations. So actually goods moving through most ports, we haven't got the functionality yet that connects in with all the community systems providers and ecosystem, as it were, in temporary storage locations, but it will work for the minority of ports that are based on GVMS and RoRo, and we will expand that out over time. So that's the first thing we've done. We are hoping to be in further live testing of that customs import declaration functionality from the end of the month. So when we get to the final slide at the end of the presentation, there is an email address if anybody thinks they might be interested in getting involved in user testing for this. We'd love to hear from you. Probably initially it will be smaller businesses that are most relevant to the test environment, because the declarations will go through the user interface rather than through the big software packages. But we are starting to test that pretty soon. On the next slide, I think the question here is what are we turning to next? So much of the industry is very interested in the October deadlines for new safety and security information obligations for EU traders. So we are absolutely on track to add the ability for EU traders as well as rest of world traders to submit safety and security declarations via the single trade window in time for those October deadlines. So we are coding that functionality at the moment, and then we'll spend time testing it so that that is all ready and well tested come October, particularly with those traders who are facing obligations for the first time in mind, some of whom may therefore actually be interested in doing declarations themselves on the user interface, although we expect most will turn to the agents market to support them. So that should all work. And at the same time, just as we've built some functionality for customs import declarations, we'll be doing export declarations and some of the excise functionality next. And then longer term, integrating those big software packages through their APIs, making sure it all also integrates in the right way with software that's used at temporary storage locations, looking at wider journeys to make the product really useful for agents, and as well as people being able to use STW to submit their declarations, to also be able to use it for all the authorizations and licenses that they might need. So quite a long journey of all sorts of bits that need adding on before it gives you everything that you need. So I think then the final slide gives an idea of how we have been engaging. So we have engaged a lot with all sorts of parts of your industry through user research, through co-design sessions, but even if we've engaged with hundreds of businesses, that means that most businesses who are trading internationally haven't particularly engaged with us yet. As I mentioned earlier, the big focus at the moment is to be lining up a pipeline of businesses, particularly small businesses who do customs import declarations at the moment, to start helping us with our testing of the live service as we enter what we call private beta over the next few weeks. So if you might be interested in helping us test things, please email us on the address on that page. So that's all I wanted to say, but again, very happy to take questions.
Thank you, Anna. And just to say that we'll provide this slide deck and a slide deck post webinar to everyone who's attended. So you'll have that STW inquiries email address, although it's not that complex, you can write it down, but you'll get it on there as a link with Anna's slide deck. Thanks for that, Anna. A lot in there and some sort of headline deadlines coming forward. I think you are looking for SMEs that do their own import declarations or would want to do their import declarations through the system. Probably they might be like hen's teeth, actually, but anywho's, it doesn't mean you shouldn't look for them. And it may indeed be that there are some on on this call who would be participating and looking to participate in that test. William Bain, my colleague, he is actually sitting opposite me, just in full disclosure and all that. And so over to you, William, to maybe say something about what you've heard, but also something about what the members of chambers up and down the country are telling us about their experience at the border these days.
Thanks, William. I think this has been a very interesting process in terms of the engagement that we've had with the Cabinet Office and with DEFRA. Also, I think looking at the sort of different needs of importers in the UK and also their export customers in the European Union. So I think the first thing to say is it was inevitable that these measures were going to be introduced. They're all a function of the changes that occurred on the 1st of January 2021. The EU introduced them immediately, as is their right. In the UK, it's taken a bit longer, largely because business and industry itself was supportive of doing this over a longer period. So we welcome the conscientious engagement which the Minister has been doing with chambers up and down the UK over the summer and autumn. The good feedback that we've had from Cabinet Office around the introduction of these changes. And so far, it seems to be relatively smooth. So I think early days, touch wood, but that seems to be where we are. And I think it is because the message was brought out to the right people. We worked very closely with our British chambers in the Netherlands and in other EU member states to make sure people were very clear about what had to be done. I think there was also a big effort in government around ensuring that the proper translated versions of export health certificates in 20 plus EU languages went out in time. No mean task. So that seems to have been done efficiently. So as Tom says, the focus is probably now turning towards the 30th of April, and there are some issues where we will be engaging further with Cabinet Office and DEFRA about. There are some unknown knowns which will be resolved in due course over the next 10 weeks or so. Clearly, the position of smaller and medium-sized enterprises over the common usage charge is looking for a bit of flexibility with government. One, in terms of the level of the charge, and also perhaps in relation to the flat rate element of it. There's a recognition that SMEs tend to import smaller amounts, perhaps in regular quantities, but nevertheless in smaller consignments than larger retailers do, for example. So we need to make sure that the charge, which is paying for the implementation of the border control posts, works in a fair way. And so we'll be, no doubt, making further representations to government about this and look forward to their eventual policy decisions around that, having heard very clearly the needs of SMEs. I think the second issue, which is coming from some exporters from the European Union into Great Britain, is over the length of time of pre-notification required around certain products. So the cut flowers industry in the Netherlands have made representations about this. There have also been representations by chilled chicken exporters in the Netherlands about whether 24 hours pre-notification works. Now, the scheme that Cabinet Office and DEFRA have alighted upon is that after 30th of April at the moment, you would apply to the PHA at the port you're sending the goods to for an exemption. And so it is possible to get an exemption from the 24-hour pre-notification requirement. I suppose there is an issue as to whether that in itself will be sufficient or whether a more general form of exemption can be created, particularly for those, this might be in due course, particularly for those who are using the Trusted Trader scheme in order to send goods into Great Britain. So I think there'll be some issues around that to be resolved over the next couple of months, but we're confident that that can occur. Some other issues that are being raised are about, what happens if you have, one part of a consignment which is being invited to undergo physical checks and what that means for the rest of the consignment. So there's still some issues about just the logistics about how that will work at ports, which again, we're confident can be resolved. So I think with good dialogue, good ongoing communications, we know that Minister Neville Rolfe is engaged in the detail of all of this. We're confident that these issues can be well managed and overcome. In relation to Anna's presentation, I think very much we encourage the rollout as quickly and efficiently as possible of the rest of STW. There are real opportunities here to make customs processes smoother, less costly, less burdensome. That is a good thing that the UK should be proud of taking the lead on. We know that there are others who are developing similar things, so we're hoping in May to go and see the processes which the Swiss are developing, which they're very interested to show us. Also, the European Union is working towards a single customs window, perhaps towards the end of the decade. So I think one hope is not a sort of defined request, but a hope is that these can be as interoperable as possible and that we have good dialogue between Cabinet Office, European Commission, the Swiss authorities, the Norwegian authorities, to ensure that as far as possible these schemes can be interoperable, and that would be a great help for our exporters as well as for our importers. So I think to sum up, Liam, it is the most significant set of changes in terms of a wide variety of goods for 50 years. But I think it's emphasised that with good dialogue between business groups and our members, as we've managed to achieve with this, and good, honest and cooperative dialogue with government, we can identify and overcome step by step the issues about the implementation of all of this.
Thank you. Sorry about that. We were muting and unmuting all and getting a bit confused about who was on and who wasn't. Hey, thank you for that, William, and I think you've done a good job of kind of bringing together not only what we're hearing from traders, but also reflecting that back to Tom and to Anna on what they had to say. We do have a few questions that people are bringing forward, and we'll certainly come to those. I think we'll kick off with those, and then I think that what will happen is more questions will come. But we'll start with Marie Farrell, who says it's more of a statement than a question, but it does allude to the point that when you come up with deadline dates by which something is going to change, and we've got some in the future, the big plea is, can we have time to prepare for that deadline. It's not the deadline, I think Marie's saying, is the problem. The problem is the guidance in advance of the deadline and not on the at the 11th hour, which I think it would be fair to say is kind of how the feeling was about the 31st January changes, that whilst people knew they were coming, they didn't quite know what the guidance was going to say and what they're going to do. And maybe as a follow-on to that, we can clarify, William, you talked about exemptions, but it's a derogation, isn't it? And maybe, Tom, you could come on to the, segue into that, the derogations that are available where a health certificate can't be found or where the 24-hour notification period is, pre-notification is insufficient. Tom?
Sure. Thank you, Liam. No,
we're not hearing you, Tom, for some reason.
Are you not?
Or is it me that's not hearing you? Yeah. Maybe it's me.
Yeah.
I'm hearing you now.
Yeah, great. So, I mean, the point about guidance a good way in advance is absolutely taken. We don't do it deliberately. Where we do it, it's just sometimes that it takes us time. There's always a whole sequence in government where you figure out exactly what the answers are to some of the questions that people want to answer, and then you try to you have to go through what the consequences are and how that can be explained and all of that. So yes, we get it, and we will try to do better. The very specific point about pre-notification, I think this is a normal part of the process, that as and when we move to implementation, issues that we were kind of generally aware of take on a sharper focus, and this is certainly one that is taking on a sharper focus right now. There are reasons why we set the 24-hour pre-notification period, because it makes it much easier operationally for the border control post to do their job in terms of knowing when things are coming, in particular to make sure that they have the resources in place at the right time, and they can therefore provide a good service in terms of carrying out any work that they need to carry out promptly, because the last thing we want is for things to be stuck at border control posts for days, and therefore we're not going to allow that to happen. We have had this, the representation we've had is that basically this does just not work for, in particular for the short straits and for just-in-time supply. Yeah. So where we're at now is this position on the sort of derogation, the request to derogation, but this is an ongoing conversation. We've heard this plea that says, could we get something a bit more predictable? And I think we have to just work through how we can do that without losing the biosecurity reasons that we brought the 24-hour requirement in the first place.
Just on that, Tom, just to because we've heard from people, particularly fresh food manufacturers in the EU or importers in the UK who are buying from European Union. We've got people who are bringing in fresh chicken, for example, and the just-in-time processing. Sometimes that chicken is not going to the supermarket shelf; it's going to someone who's going to add value before it gets to the supermarket shelf. But it's definitely a just-in-time process. Is it the case that they ought to be looking to be trusted traders to avoid the need for the pre-notification? You can't avoid that; you have to do that. But the derogation point is that apparently, according to the Meat Trade Association, out of a sample of 10 applications for derogations, the only one was awarded or what was given. So derogation route doesn't seem to be very reliable.
Well, so far, as far as I'm aware, I would need to subject to. If I'm wrong, I'll let you know afterwards.
Yeah,
we are not linking any of the trusted trader modules to the pre-notification period. We're linking it. The one that is currently live is about reduced requirements for export health or certification or phytosanitary certification. The trusted trader modules that we're bringing in will be either checks away from the border or reduced volumes of checks. But so this linkage point that William initially raised isn't one that's been put to me before, but it's one I'm really happy to take back to DEFRA. And as I said, I accept the point that being told you can apply for a derogation and we might say yes and we might say no is not ideal for the trade. So I will take that one away.
No, and that's it's putting uncertainty in place. And I know that we've heard from people who have had, it's maybe early days and teething problems, but finding someone to provide an export health certificate from some countries has proved difficult, and therefore, there's been a challenge with getting the certificate in the first place, and they seek a derogation and don't get it. They're left in limbo. So
Liam, actually on that, I mean, it's a question I'm sure I've put to you and William before, but we hear this. Yeah. And we hear the authorities of each individual member state saying, no, we're kind of okay, we don't have a capacity issue. It would be really great if we could get something a bit more granular of where these pockets are. Is it particular industries? Is it particular member states or bits of member states where people are currently not struggling to sell stuff to the UK because they just can't get a certificate? We'd really, really like to understand that.
Yeah, and you'll understand as well, Tom, that there are people who are not required to have them right now, but see the 31st January deadline requirements, and they're looking at their products and saying, are there going to be enough people to provide these certificates in April if there aren't enough in January in those countries? So member states we had were Poland and Germany, but let me get you more granular data than that and circle back to you with that information. I suspect your colleagues already have it actually, but we'll make sure you have it.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's maybe that I haven't had that depth of discussion with DEFRA, because what I tend to get is, well, no, we're being assured that it's generally fine. Liam, while I've got the floor, I just wanted to pick up also on one other of William's points, which is about if you have one higher risk item in a mixed load, then obviously we're going to be prioritizing the consignments of highest risk. But yes, broadly speaking, once there are physical inspections, then lower risk goods that are being shipped with significant numbers of higher risk goods are at greater risk of being stopped. Now, we will try to be very focused. We will try to keep things moving, in a couple of hours as opposed to days. But it's one of those things where there is just no dressing up that this is a new regime which we're bringing in for the biosecurity reasons that I set out, and I'm not going to deny it will have consequences, and over time we're quite happy to talk to the trade about how we work together to manage those consequences.
But it's almost inevitable. But it might be a nice segue to move on to that kind of data piece and bring Anna in on. So first of all, that was Marie Farrell's questions that we've kind of dealt with. So or Mary Farrell, it's one of those names you can pronounce correctly or incorrectly. So I'll go for both. So if we go on now to Susan Nicholson, who, Anna, could well be one of those SMEs traders that does their own import and export declarations that you're looking to work with, but she's asking, will there be an upload option available for the single trader window? They import and export declarations for themselves. They don't involve any intermediaries, and they are the import and exporter on record. Well, you always are, even if you use an intermediary, but they would be interested to know what functionality they'll have or will exist with the STW as you roll that out.
Yeah, good question. Not sure I can provide you a totally clean answer. I may have to check in with colleagues. So certainly if you're preparing your declarations on sort of commercial software that is built for businesses and built for the trade, that will work because you can use their software interface, and that's where the application programming interfaces in IT terms come in and feed it into single trade window. What I am not actually sure myself categorically is if you've built your own way of preparing your import and export declarations that's not on sort of mainstream international trade software, can you just sort of click upload and it all finds its way into the right places on our user interface? I would need to check. I would hope that if that's a significant and common user need, that we will pick that up through user research and through our user testing and look at that. But I'm not actually sure if and where sort of DIY offline prep and then try and just press a button and feed it in sits.
Probably the key factor here is the data elements, isn't it? I mean, if the data elements are in the proprietary software that you're using, Susan Nicholson, then and they're mapped in that way, you should be able to link them across either via API or an upload function. I mean, I'm not an IT expert, but I feel confident that this basic level stuff about moving data from one place to another ought to be possible. And consulting with your IT provider, it may be that you've got an off-the-shelf solution. There are quite a few out there now where you can simply buy the software that has the data elements in the right place. Should maybe work. Tom, you wanted to say something?
No, just to say, I mean, we've kind of worked from the outset in terms of, you know, an API first approach, so that it ought to be available for use with any software. But obviously, it does need the software provider to do something, to be aware of our API and to link it into that API. So if you're using a bit of software and you want it to link to STW, I think talk to your software provider and get them to engage, get them to look out for the STW APIs.
Yeah, absolutely.
And certainly some businesses sort of build their own bits of software and build their own APIs. So APIs work, yes. What I don't know is if there's a sort of hybrid that's between sort of entering things into the user interface and not actually building the API as the pipe to upload it for you.
Yeah. Well, that I think that's probably right, Anna. That I think the answer is that it may not be available as an upload, but actually there are some really low-cost software as a service solutions out there that probably will API with a solution. Quick one, Tom, you mentioned in your segment about a helpline. Can you give us the link for that helpline, and we'll, or maybe a colleague can put it into the chat, but we'll certainly make sure you have that. That's somebody who's put that question on the Q&A. We'll make sure that you have that subsequently.
And yes, what I would say is, if you're trying to bring in, if you're part of a chain that's trying to bring in SPS goods from the EU, and there's a niggle in terms of getting hold of an EHC, I will supply the number. I probably can't do it literally now because I'm not that skilled, but don't think because I haven't got an EHC I can't send the stuff. No. Do talk to the helpline, because depending on what your goods are, they might be able to find a way through that meets our needs in the short term.
Yeah, they may, they kind of, yeah, absolutely, or they may not. And that's the problem that businesses face, is that sometimes there isn't a solution, but certainly we'll get you the helpline data. Nicola Robinson, Nicola, I think I'm going to answer this question because I think I know the answer for you, which is you work for a group of research institutes and you have regular imports of specialist samples and goods. As charities, you've also got special reliefs available. Your biggest frustration is the difficulty of getting corrections made to declarations that have been made on your behalf and are incorrect. So the incorrect importer or record, or the zero VAT rate not applied, and so on. Look, quick answer for you, which I think I can give and others might be reticent to give, is unbundle the transport of the goods with the declaration of the goods and find a specialist customs broker like Chamber Customs, who will make sure that you get it right first time and don't have to do a post-clearance amendment, and make sure that the import is done properly for you. I would say that, wouldn't I? But other customs brokers are available, but very often the people moving the goods just want to move them the fastest way possible. Getting it right isn't necessarily something that they will always, in your experience, achieve. Get someone who knows about the border and the way to file declarations properly would be the answer I would give you. And by all means, talk to us at Chamber Customs, and we'll do some tests for you and show you what's possible. So hopefully that's good.
Liam, incidentally, I've just emailed to you and to Heidi the email addresses and phone numbers for the AFA helpline.
Excellent, thank you for that. The next question comes from Agatha McLean, who says, must traders' iPaths be linked to brokers' iPaths via managed partners to allow the brokers to submit pre-notification in the trader's behalf? Or can the agent use their own IPAFs registration only without being linked to the trader's one? So I guess this is one about the use of intermediaries for making these pre-notifications and IPAF statements. I don't know if that's maybe too technical.
And I fear this goes back to my disclaimer at the beginning of the meeting that if you want really fine detail about HMRC or DEFRA processes, I'm afraid I'm not your guy. But if we can just get a note of that, if we will. I mean, Liam, actually, even the questions you don't raise today, if you can pick them up off the chat and fire them into me,
we will. We will. We've done that before, and you and your colleagues have been very good at responding and allowing us to feedback a comprehensive question response. So we'll definitely do that. I think this might be a similar one from Susan on IPAFs. It's very detailed. Yeah, let's come back to Susan on the IPAFs and APHA stuff separately. Yen Kirkham, Yen, I've been reading your question and trying to understand. If we import goods from Euro Republic, well, from the EU, and you export them as into the Republic of Ireland, do we have to raise documents separately from the documents of the goods that are originally from the UK? Well, the goods from the UK to Republic of Ireland would still require paperwork both ways, I think. So EU to ROI, you're not exporting them, you're moving them within the single market from the EU to ROI, so they don't need any paperwork. But you would need to raise a declaration for the goods that are originally from the UK going to ROI. Yeah, you would. So I think that's, Yen, again, talk to a broker or Chamber Customs, who are brokers as well, and we can help you to understand what's involved there. Yeah, that's it. That's a repeat, Yen, of that. So I think we've covered all the questions that have been raised so far in the chat. I guess for me, I mean, one of the things, just to finish off, perhaps we've got a little bit of a few minutes more, is the trade is complex. And Anna, I see your schematic, your graphic that says you can operate directly into the single trader window, which of course, from BCC point of view, as a business representative organisation, we would say fabulous. We can reduce costs of trading for businesses in the UK, and actually we got a good example there in the chat, sorry, in the Q&A with regard to someone who does their own declarations. But it can be complex for people. Will you be providing training or workshops or guidance on how to use the single trader window, or is it for people to find that information elsewhere to become their own customs agent and to operate the system? What's the solution?
Yeah, bit of both. So we are doing quite a lot of work on the guidance service and looking to integrate that and embed it as relevantly and helpfully as possible in the single trade window itself. So at the moment, there's loads of guidance out there, but we get feedback that it's in different places. It's quite hard to digest and bring together yourself for what do I need to do for this particular consignment across the whole of government. So we are looking to improve that considerably and to give you the bits of guidance you need at the right point in your user journey. That is not something that is all there as we go into private beta this month. That is something that will sort of add over time. So some hand-holding initially, but I think that, as you're right, the border is so complex. There will always be some customers and some scenarios where actually the right answer is to use an agent to help you, even if we make our guidance as straightforward and integrated as we possibly can.
Yeah,
I'd agree with that. I mean, as Anna said, we have absolutely no ambition, and no minister that I spoke to has had any ambition of knocking intermediaries out of the market. I
wasn't implying such a thing.
We're not that daft.
No, and Liam, you know who some of the ministers are that I've worked for, right? I mean, I think that we reckon international trade can be quite complex. It just can be. Our ambition is that the bit of it which is about feeding in bits of data to government shouldn't be so complicated that you have to get a specialist intermediary just for that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's our ambition. We want to make our bit of it simple. And if we have the opportunities in the process, and this is not just putting the burden on Anna and her program here, this is for the government generally, the more opportunities we have to sort of, you know, to work with the private sector, work with the experts, to signpost people towards making it easy, because there is a massive ambition from many of the ministers across government to get more people exporting, to hit the 1 trillion exports objective, and we just want to make sure that it's not government process that's the problem.
Absolutely, and as we know, there are many businesses that use the NES historically for their exports because they are easy to do and don't require port badges and so on and so forth. And I'm quite sure that there'll be businesses in the future, Anna, that will use the single trader window for exports and may use an agent occasionally for a complicated import and so on. It'll be a blended marketplace for sure, and there'll be plenty of work to go around. Caroline Causeway, I haven't forgotten your question that came in. It falls into the category of I think the people in the room probably need to go to someone that knows the answer for you about when you export using a health certificate and your product of animal origin gets rejected at the UK border or gets rejected at the EU border. If you want to bring those goods back, do you need to get another import health certificate, an export health certificate from the other side, or do you just bring the goods back using the one that you exported under? I don't know the answer to that, but I'd love to know the answer to that. That's a little granular question that we'll get the answer to you pretty quickly, I feel certain. It remains for me only to say thank you very much to Tom Smith from the Cabinet Office, who, as ever, has brought candour and some life to what could otherwise be a fairly dry subject. And I think the ambition that they have at the Cabinet Office to, you know, get a operating model functioning to, as William says, to consult with others before they arrive at the solution and to improve is very admirable. Anna, thank you for your participation, sharing what the shape of the single trader window will be like, and again, reinforcing that you want to work with traders to make sure that you get it right in the pilot phase before final rollout. And hopefully we've found someone to be participating on that. And to my colleague William Bain, as ever, William, representing and sharing the information that we receive from our members up and down the country, but also the engagement that we have with Cabinet Office, with the HMRC, DBT and other departments of government around trade. So thanks for being here, and we'll follow up with an email where we'll share the information as much as we can and follow up on those questions for those that have asked them. As ever, if there's something you haven't been able to ask today and you want to ask it, chambercustoms.co.uk has got an inquiry form. Please feel free to put it in there and we'll do our best to answer your questions. Thank you very much and have a good day.
Thank you.